Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of 2016 Elections. And I was mentioning during a lot of these interviews that primary is May 17th, and this is when you get to choose your candidates for city government and also for national government. So with me today is David McTeague, who's running for the 5th Congressional District here in Oregon.
That's right.
And welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ken.
And what made you decide to run? This is a big undertaking.
Well, I'm a longtime Oregon Democratic and environmental and consumer political activist, and we've been growing, and I live in Milwaukee, which is the north end of the 5th Congressional District in Clackamas County, and we've been growing progressively more concerned with the voting record of our incumbent Democrat, Kurt Schrader, who chairs the Blue Dog Caucus in the House of Representatives, which are the conservative Democrats who frequently vote with Republicans on issue after issue. And frankly, he cast a vote that really appalled us.
And that was what?
He last fall, he voted against President Obama's plan to allow a few Syrian refugees to come to this country by creating onerous requirements in addition to all the lengthy requirements that the vetting process already required for Syrian refugees to come into this country. Obama's plan was to only allow 10,000 Syrian refugees into this country. I think about a third of those have actually come in now. Other countries like Canada and France are accepting 30 and 40 and 50,000 refugees. Of course, Turkey has like 2 million and Lebanon has 1 million. It's a terrible humanitarian crisis that we're partially the cause of because of our ill-considered invasion of Iraq and destabilizing that region. And the least we could do would be to do our part in alleviating some of this humanitarian catastrophe, and our congressman voted to make that so much more difficult.
Well, that explains you're passionate about these issues. And I guess we could talk a little bit about the Middle East, and you kind of made the point that we destabilized that area, and now we've got humanitarian crisis going on. We've got even bigger problems with terrorists in that area, and so it's made the whole situation worse.
Yes, as Senator Sanders said last night in the Brooklyn debate, you know, when we go in and try and do regime change, it doesn't usually turn out that well for us.
Well, you know, it seems like as long as I've been alive, it seems like politics at the national level has been about showing how tough you are. And I'm reminded of our own community here in Salem with the police department, where they try to make sure that they don't make somebody's bad day worse. And they take some time to try to figure out what's the best way to handle this situation rather than using just brute force. Because a lot of times there's better solutions that don't get people killed, and in this case create a huge refugee problem. So maybe we start to think about our problems more as something that doesn't have to be solved with military force. And that seems to be what we choose first, not last. But that's my opinion.
Right, and I probably would greatly agree with you. And thinking about the debate that just occurred in Brooklyn, you know, Senator Sanders talked so eloquently about how we need a two-state solution and a balanced approach to the Israeli-Palestinian question. And his opponent, you know, made the big speech to AIPAC, American Israel Political Action Committee, which basically, you know, supports the Netanyahu government's position, which is they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and we need a balanced solution to the Middle East. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about supporting Senator Sanders, is because he supports a program for peace in the Middle East that I don't think his opponent does.
One of the big issues that concerns me, and that's as a private individual and looking at my kids and my grandkids to be, I don't have any actually yet, I'm hoping, is that climate change to me is not being taken seriously enough, that they there really needs to be some action taken now, some policy set into place to do something about it. So, I'm going to be asking all the candidates, do you believe in the science of climate change?
Absolutely.
And what positive steps can we take to do something about it as individuals and as a government entity?
Well, first of all, let's stop all the bad environmental things that are going on right now. Let's stop fracking. Let's quit pumping chemicals and water, and we don't even know what they're pumping into the ground to break up the oil shales and release the natural gas, because apparently that's proprietary information. And so it's causing health effects, it's causing environmental effects, and it's promoting use of fossil fuels, which is a greenhouse gas. So that's a big part of it. Let's quit strip mining coal. Let's phase out coal. If you notice, Peabody Coal in Appalachia just went bankrupt. So there's a phase down going on of coal. We need to accelerate that. We need to accelerate the transition to solar and renewable and wind and all the alternative energies. We need a massive program of energy conservation and to retrofit buildings that are hugely energy efficient and save as much energy as we can, so we don't have to generate more electricity using coal or natural gas or oil or other environmentally unfriendly fuels.
And also about 25 to 30% of the electricity generated is lost in transition from a power plant to wherever it's going. And so if we had a more diversified energy system for your electric grid, that would help.
Right. When I was in the legislature, one of the things I did get done was I helped extend the Oregon solar and renewable energy tax credits, because they were scheduled to be phased out, and we managed to get rid of the phase out and keep those going. So a little bit I was able to do as a legislator was to help nurture and support Oregon's solar and renewable energy industry, which is really thriving now, as I understand. But we need to take all that to an entirely new level. We need to so much promote solar and renewable energy, especially the decentralized kind, to lessen people's dependence upon the electricity grid and centralized power station generation like we have now.
And if you had enough of it, when say the wind isn't blowing, you can take advantage of the solar. If it's it's amazing that Germany has so much more solar generated power, and that's generally a pretty cloudy place. Well, something like Oregon, I think.
What we need is a national commitment. I mean, a real national commitment. Like you said, President Carter was trying to make this all happen when he was president, and then Reagan came in and took the solar panels off the White House and turned back the clock and pushed coal and nuclear power and things like that, and to send us in the wrong direction. So we need to go back in the direction in a big, big way.
So there is a lot of resistance by the Republican Party, basically, but some in the Democrats as well. And what is your hope as a legislator, if you're elected, that you will be able to do?
Well, number one, I want Senator Bernie Sanders to be the next president of the United States. And if he is, I want to be part of the political revolution that supports a positive, far-reaching, aggressive program that addresses many of the issues that he's raised, be it income inequality or the transition to renewable energy or making Social Security more secure. That's what I want to be part of. The real practical challenges we're going to have to work on, like how do we create green energy jobs that employ union electricians at family wage jobs. Some of the practical, really get down to it stuff is going to be hard to figure out and hard to do, but that's what I want to work on. I want to work on those solutions. I want to promote environmentally friendly green jobs that result in family wage jobs that people can go apprentice and become part of an occupation and a trade that helps to pay the bills and fuel our economy.
Well, one of the reasons why I think we have a problem and that is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the other trade, well, that's a proposed bill. But we've had a number of trade bills that have outsourced a very well-paying manufacturing jobs as well as other kinds of well-paying jobs
Yes.
as well. And,
Yes.
and so the Trans-Pacific Partnership is being sold as a trade bill, but I don't see any difference between that and the bills like NAFTA and some of the others that we've already had huge job losses from. And the other thing that bothers me is that only 6 of the chapters out of 30 have to do with actual trade. And so what is your position on the Trans-Pacific Partnership?
Number one, my position, the most important plank in my campaign for Congress is fair trade versus unfair trade. And I am so opposed to the proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal that I joined the Oregon Fair Trade Campaign protest on March 21st at the Oregon Historical Society, where they were hosting the World Affairs Council and the U.S. ambassadors to Brunei and Malaysia and places like that. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a bad deal for American workers. It's a bad deal for environmental protections here and at home. It holds out false promises of better trade and exports in exchange for what? For more cheap goods coming into this country to undermine our manufacturing base. There are tremendous problems with it. Now they've dressed it up good though. If you read the language of the TPP, it's got labor standards language that sounds good. There's a side deal with a side agreement with Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam, because they're the worst abusers of labor rights of the TPP countries that are signatories or parties to this proposed agreement, that they will significantly improve their labor standards. However, as usual, the flowery language is not backed up with truly effective enforcement mechanisms. These side agreements are not really enforceable for 5 years. So for 5 years, they can do pretty much whatever they want before we would have any standing to go into a tribunal, and that's another topic, how this enforcement works before these so-called tribunals, these kind of kangaroo courts that will pass judgment on trade disputes, and there's not going to be effective in enforcement. And the United States there's a very, very poor track record of enforcing labor standards agreements where they do exist in the various and different trade deals. So that's a real problem. And the AFL-CIO and the labor people that were following this and were party to some of the discussions are very unhappy with the results of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's very disturbing to me as a Democrat that our Democratic Party administration would push this, and that certain Congress people, including Congressman Schrader, would push these trade deals over on us. Now, on the other hand, we've got some really fine Congress people like Senator Jeff Merkley, who I truly admire, and Congressman DeFazio, who has long fought these trade deals. Now, those are 2 Oregon congressional representatives who are opposed to the TPP and opposed to these unfair trade deals. So there's a split out there between the corporate Democrats and the working people pro-labor Democrats over these so-called trade deals. And you know which side I'm on. I'm on the fair trade side.
Well, this happened to me many years ago. I went to work for a company, and the pay was so much better. And I asked my boss after I was hired, why? Why is the pay so much better than these other places? And he told me that the ownership didn't want unions in there. And what that lesson told me was that even though I wasn't a member of the union was helping me.
Exactly.
And I think that's something that's been lost over the years because, quite frankly, anti-union
Right.
propaganda. But that really drove the lesson home to me. And I came from a very conservative family that was very anti-union. But it really opened up my eyes as to what the benefits were for union, even if you didn't belong.
Right, exactly. I mean, unions are one of the great drivers of what created the great middle class in this country. The ability to organize for decent wages and benefits and working conditions. And the fact that labor has declined is almost synonymous with the decline of the middle class and the growing levels of income inequality we have in this country. There's many factors and things going on, but that's a big part of it. And on the other hand, we have all this corporate lobbyist money flowing into the political process that's contorting, the decisions that are being made. And so people like Congressman Schrader, if you look at where his political action money comes from, it comes from lobbyists and special interest PACs, overwhelmingly. A list as long as your arm. I mean, it's just amazing. This PAC and that PAC and this special interest and this corporation. And that Senator Sanders is absolutely right when he says we have a corrupt campaign finance system that's distorting our democracy. And that is so true. And until we do something about that, we're going to have a hard time doing anything for the people of this country.
We were talking actually before the show about some of the other things involved with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, about these tribunals that you were talking about as well. And you gave some examples of some of the problems.
Yeah.
And one of the things, too, that kind of caught my attention is generic drugs.
Right. Oh, yes. They're extending patent protections to the pharmaceutical industry in all these countries. So for extra numbers of years, generics will be forbidden, and consumers in this country and other places won't have access to them because the pharmaceutical industry was very involved in the writing, in secret, I might add, of the Trans-Pacific Partnership language. I mean, there were like 600 corporate lobbyists and lawyer types at the table helping write this proposal, and working people and consumer advocates and public interest advocates were kept in the dark for years and years while this was being negotiated. And that's so much for transparency when it comes to how this was developed.
So what are some of the other examples of what's in the TPP that could cause us problems as a country?
There's environmental regulations. I want to just focus on that because things have happened under NAFTA and their tribunal system that have demonstrated that will be at risk. The TPP empowers some 9,000 plus global corporations to have standing to bring investor disputes before this tribunal system. And so it could be anything that affects their bottom line or their perceived bottom line. If a decision by a government to say we're not going to allow fracking, and some foreign corporation could come in and say, but we were going to frack, and now you made a decision that says we can't do fracking, so you need to make us whole. You need to pay us billions of dollars in compensation. For example, TransCanada, that wanted to build a Keystone Pipeline, is suing the United States before the NAFTA tribunal, the three-member tribunal. Same dynamic. And they're going to take and claiming that because we made an allegedly political decision in the United States against the Keystone Pipeline, that they need to be compensated for their lost profits and benefits. And you just multiply that, 100-fold by all these other corporations that will have standing to bring trade disputes under the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement if that were to be finalized.
Well, it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because the thing is they could have built the pipeline to their own coastal ports, but that wasn't talked about very much, was it?
No, and they probably they still could or still might, but why should we be a party to the environmental decimation of northern Alberta and the strip mining and the pollution that's going to cause? And that Keystone oil is a particularly dirty oil too. It's very negative for the climate, and it's full of bad stuff. And We don't need that. We need to transition away from our over dependence on fossil fuels. And besides, we have a glut on the world oil market right now. We don't need that oil. What we need to do is put our money and our investments in a better place.
Well, one thing might be in more public transportation, for example, so people can get from point A to point B better, and make it more accessible to folks instead of us all going out and buying a car. I mean, think of how much money you would save if you weren't keeping a car.
And these other countries are so far ahead of us in terms of high speed rail. I mean, we're almost in the dark ages in a lot of respects. Now, Portland has a nice light rail system that we've invested in, but that's it's not like that all over the country. You know, Portland has such a better light rail system than most of the other cities in the entire U.S., so that's to our credit and the credit of the people that helped get the funding for that. But you go to France or you go to Japan and you maybe China, and you find high-speed light rail to move people around. We have these old clunky Amtrak trains that we rely on. So we're way behind. We need a major infrastructure investment in this country.
Well, it seems like in transportation, automobiles and airplanes are heavily supported, whereas the rest of the transportation system is very much neglected. And as a result, you know, like if you're taking a trip from, say, Portland to, say, San Francisco or Los Angeles, you can fly, but you have to go out to a faraway airport. Now, luckily, Portland does have, you know, a light rail system goes out there. But then when you get into Los Angeles, you're not necessarily close to where you want to be.
That's for sure.
And, you know, like a lot of the rail systems were set up to go from downtown to downtown. So, you know, you could get downtown by that same light rail system in Portland. And if they do have some transportation systems now in Los Angeles, but for years you'd have to get a cab or something else when you got there to get around. So to me, we could, you know, instead of the individual spending money on an automobile, if we had a decent transportation system, we could get around by these alternate methods. And maybe we only need one car instead of one for every driver in the family.
Or in our house, we have an electric car, and that gets my wife around town, because most of our driving is within, you know, 15 or 20 or 30 miles, and so one little electric car can take care of most all your inner city driving.
And that would be a bonus right there, because it's
right. So we need lots of incentives for appropriate transportation alternatives, and we need to encourage, you know, bike and pedestrian as much as possible too, and we need to put people closer to work to where they live, and it's all about building a positive community.
One of the other issues that usually it bothers me for a particular reason, because I'm part of the baby boom generation, which I imagine you're part of as well. But during the 80s, they told us that they needed to increase our Social Security insurance payments because we're going to retire and it's going to cause a huge problem if we don't start paying more. So I went from paying a few $100s every year into SSI to a couple of thousand or more. And the thing is that now that I've retired, and actually since before I retired, they keep talking about, well, we need to have entitlement reform, which usually means cutting back on the benefits for Social Security and Medicare. To me, it just feels so unfair, you know, that they would pull this kind of trick on us by giving away the money in tax cuts. And so I have a big problem with it. I don't know if you feel the same way about it, but...
Well, first of all, I support Senator Sanders' plan to reform Social Security and increase benefits, not cut benefits. And he proposes to lift the cap on incomes so that the wealthier people will pay into the Social Security system, and it doesn't get, you know, your contribution doesn't get capped
at 120,000 roughly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So there's that's the quickest way to make the Social Security system more whole and better financed, considering that there's going to be a baby boom bulge. We all know that. But everything I've read about Social Security says that it's not isn't anywhere near as bad shape as the deficit hawks are trying to tell you. My opponent, Congressman Schrader, sponsored legislation to implement the so-called Simpson-Bowles recommendations. That commission that was set up to propose some kind of a budgetary reform and cuts. The Simpson-Bowles would have called for cuts in Social Security and Medicare, or at least, the increases in the COLAs that keep people whole. And so that's a clear difference between my opponent and me in this primary election.
And from what I understand, even their proposal would only take care of maybe, say, like 20–25% of the problem that they foresee. And as you said, it's not, it's off in the future, and it's not something that is an immediate problem. But by taking the cap off, that takes care of basically the whole problem. It's like 85% of the problem that they're talking about that's 30 years into the future.
Right. Social Security is the most important social safety net program we ever enacted in this country. If we didn't have Social Security, there's people who would be, so many more people would be living on the streets in destitute poverty. This has been the most important program that we've ever had, and of course it was passed over Republican opposition, and then there's a whole other group that wants to privatize it. It's been the most successful social insurance program, and for the benefit of millions and millions of people that we've ever had in this country. And we need to protect and preserve Social Security. That's absolutely an essential, basic, bedrock position of any progressive person in this country.
Well, the other thing, too, that it does is it creates a floor for the economy, because you have that money coming into the economy on a regular basis. And if you take that away or start degrading it, the floor gets lower and lower.
Yes, absolutely.
And that, to me, is a huge problem. Well, we've only got a minute or so left, and
Okay.
I know that I took up most of the time talking about the issues that I'm interested in, but is there anything that we didn't discuss that you'd like to bring up that are very important to you?
Well, I think we need a big youth employment program. Like I said, when I went through college, I worked at the old Del Monte cannery here in Salem for 9 years and helped put me through college. And so we need good paying minimum wage jobs. We need to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, not $12 an hour. And we need a youth employment program to address, especially in the inner cities, for minority youth. We need criminal justice reform, Black Lives Matter. We need to protect the rights of all our citizens, LGBTQ, all of the above. We need to have a country that really cares about its people. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need to pass the DREAM Act, which my opponent voted against. There are many, many things we need to do. And when I'm your congressman, I will be a progressive congressman. I will also be pragmatic and effective.
Well, David McTeague, I'd like to thank you for coming in and joining us here on 2016 election. And thank you for watching.
My pleasure.